Tonight on America Decides, deal reached. From Tel Aviv to Gaza, people gather as the Middle East moves a step closer to peace. The ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas and the role that the Biden and Trump officials played in making it happen.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come.
President Biden will take to the airwaves again tonight for a primetime address from the White House, capping a 5-decade political career. And from Florida into the fray, Trump's cabinet pick for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, and Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi both faced Senate confirmation hearings. Tonight, we start with CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan for the latest on the ceasefire agreement. Margaret, thank you for being here. I know you've been reporting on this all day, talking to all the officials involved. I want to talk about the implementation of this in a moment, but let's first start with what exactly this deal is and really how it came together.
Well, everything really came together within the last 96 hours. But this goes back to the framework that President Biden stood up and laid out publicly in May, at the end of May. So that's been floating out there. But the momentum behind the diplomacy really happened after the election. President Biden, for him, foreign policy is a huge part of his legacy, and he wanted to get a ceasefire deal. He deployed his diplomats to the region, both to get a ceasefire in Lebanon and also to push on the hostages. All of this started picking up momentum very recently. Brett McGurk is the top White House advisor to Joe Biden. He sent him to Doha, and he's been there for weeks. Within the last 96 hours or so, Donald Trump, the president-elect, sent his envoy, Steve Witkoff, to be really working with him arm in arm. A senior administration official was briefing reporters earlier today and said the origins of that partnership really came out of that Oval Office meeting between President Biden and President-elect Trump recently, where he said it's in the interest of the country to get this peace deal help support here. It's to show that there can't be a fissure that could be exploited by Hamas or Israel there. Long story short, fast forward to what came together within the last few hours. And there were some 11th hour hiccups, but ultimately this was announced.
You know, it's interesting that we saw these two teams working together seemingly so seamlessly. I mean, Witkoff was telling us at Mar-a-Lago last week, you know, he was praising the Biden administration for bringing him in. But he also said that he thought that Trump deserved, you know, his persistence here and his persona, in his words, really helped to drive these negotiations. And I'm curious if there is any truth to that, if Trump does deserve some of the credit here.
Well, in terms of the structure of the diplomacy, the details, the sequencing, all that work, that was diplomats for months and weeks, right? And so it was sort of the closing element where I'm told by my sources that Steve Witkoff really became very useful. And the threat of Donald Trump coming to office became useful, particularly to the more and more right-wing Israeli government. For Benjamin Netanyahu to hear, after defying Joe Biden for the better part of the past year and a half, that Donald Trump actually wants him to do something. And to have him send his envoy from Florida to Israel, as he did over the weekend, to get that message, was received differently. And for Hamas, they've been under increased pressure as well. Don't forget the other element. Yahya Sinwar, the architect of that horrific attack on October 7th, is off the battlefield. There have been dynamics in this conflict that have changed dramatically. It's his brother who accepted this deal, and he was strong-armed into it by Egypt and Qatar. But the dynamic on the ground has changed. The closing element of having Donald Trump say, I want this too, really did help.
Apply the pressure. And then, you know, obviously we have the deal. Implementing it is a whole other story. What are the kind of complications or challenges ahead for this? Well,
just tomorrow in Cairo, Egypt, they will have an implementation meeting to talk through the very difficult part of seeing this through. So an agreement on paper, it's only worth the paper it's written on, right? You have to see people follow through with it. Also within Israel, you have the political dynamic that is very complicated. The prime minister under increased pressure from within his right wing. Just within the past few days, some members of his coalition have threatened to collapse his government if he agreed to a peace deal, because they are from that element within Israel that believe Gaza should not be under Palestinian control, but rather should be annexed, who don't want to give an inch. you have the left wanting the hostages back and just an end to the fighting. So Benjamin Netanyahu's in the middle of this and ultimately came to the agreement, but the process is still not certain. He has to get this deal approved by his cabinet, by the Knesset, their version of a parliament, and we may see some legal challenges, I'm told by my sources, in the coming days, particularly when that list of Palestinian prisoners who will be released, hundreds of them from Israeli detention centers, that may go through some legal challenges. But it was all signed off on by the Israeli security cabinet.
All right, a lot to look forward. Good news, but we'll see how it gets implemented. Margaret Brennan,
a very big deal.
A very big deal. Thank you very much for your reporting. We appreciate it. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby is with us now. Mr. Kirby, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. This is all, of course, fantastic news. I'm curious, though, how confident are you that both sides will be able to abide by this agreement? Because implementation of this will be the challenge.
Yeah, you're right. Now comes the real hard work of putting the modalities of the plan in place and executing to it over the course of the weeks and months ahead. And that's going to be tough work. The president said today that he's confident it can and will be implemented. And he knows, because we've been in touch with the incoming Trump team, how seriously they're taking this. They know that they're now going to be responsible for implementation, which is why we wanted them informed from the very, very beginning of what was being negotiated. And we're confident that they certainly have the experience and the wisdom now. They certainly know enough about the deal that they can carry it through. And obviously, it's going to require commitments by all sides, by the Israelis, by Hamas, certainly our partners in the region who will be also monitoring implementation. A lot of hard work ahead, but we're confident that it can be done.
And there are Americans, of course, being held hostage as well. Do we know how many Americans are going to be released? When will we see them returned?
Well, I don't want to get into too much detail at this time as we work out these final steps towards implementation starting this weekend. But we do know that there will be Americans, more than one, in the first tranche that come out. And again, I want to stress that the first tranche is going to be focused on women, the elderly, the sick, the injured, the most at risk. And so we know that there are Americans in that group, but it won't be all of the Americans in that group. So, but we can say for sure that some Americans will come out in this first tranche.
That is great news. And I want to ask, because you mentioned, obviously, President-elect Trump will be president once the ceasefire has ended. So they've been part of this negotiation for a while now. We saw that Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, was in Doha working on these negotiations. How much credit do you think that Trump should get for this successful negotiation?
Well, first of all, I would hope we would all move beyond the question of who gets credit. I mean, I don't think that the hostages are caring about that, and I don't think their families care about that. I don't think the Palestinians in Gaza care about who gets credit for this. The truth is that there's a lot of credit to go around, including in the region. Prime Minister Netanyahu, who made some courageous decisions, Egyptians, the Qataris, and certainly here in the United States. It's important to remember that this deal was the deal that President Biden negotiated and put on the table back in May, got international support for it. That's the deal that we're talking about being implemented here coming forward, and it was due to a lot of intense diplomacy by American diplomats since May to now. It also was a result of the work that the IDF did to decimate Hamas's military power and put them in such a position of weakness, them and Iran, that there was no support for Hamas moving forward. Hamas knew it had to deal. And that was a result, again, of work by the IDF and with our support to make it harder for Hamas. But clearly, and the president talked about this today, we approach these negotiations as one team. Once President-elect Trump won the election, the president directed us, our team, to reach out to them to make sure that they were fully informed and were coordinated with and involved. And Mr. Witkoff was involved in discussions in the region, in Doha and in Tel Aviv, because we know, President knew, that it was going to be up to Mr. Witkoff and the Trump team to implement this. We just talked about how hard it's going to be to implement or how much work there's going to need to be done. Need to make sure that they were fully informed so they could do that.
And the Qatari prime minister complimented that collaboration as influential. You mentioned Hamas because Biden did say today that the people of Gaza can look forward to a future without Hamas. But what's your assessment of their current state within the Middle East right now?
They're much weaker, Hamas is, than they've ever been before. Again, Sinwar is dead. The leader, the one who decided to launch those dastardly attacks on the 7th of October. Their other leaders at all kinds of levels in their chains of command have been taken off the battlefield. Infrastructure's been destroyed. Tunnels absolutely flattened. No ability to continue to recruit the kind of fighters that they want. Militarily, they are a spent force, and they are dramatically weaker, which is why we believe they were more willing to deal now. Of course, they're also more isolated. It's not just Hamas that's weaker. Iran is weaker than it's ever been before. Hezbollah wasn't going to come to the rescue of Hamas because the United States brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And Hamas, they could see the writing on the wall. They could see they had really nowhere else to go.
All right, well, we will, of course, stay tuned as this becomes implemented and looking forward, hopefully, to some good news this weekend for those families. John Kirby, thank you so much. It was great to see you.
Yes, ma'am. You too.